All right. Greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, or Adam's Fun Sale. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in at a strange, unorthodox time. This stream was supposed to start at 7 o'clock or 7 CAT, but because of Cyril Ramaphosa out of nowhere, like he always does, announcing that he's going to address the nation on COVID-19 and on the lockdown. I had to adapt the time a little bit, but fortunately, our guest tonight was able to adapt his time as well to this. So thank you very much for joining us, Quentin. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Ernst. How's it going?
No, it's going good, man. You're a recurring guest on the show, so I don't think you're too new to the majority of people that are tuning in.
Yeah, it feels like familiar territory, and a wonderful familiar territory at that.
Well, man, I think the first time we chatted, it was just as you were pretty much just an expert in psychology that I wanted to pick your brain of, but now it's just more of a friendly chat in terms of I just want us to have a chat over a beer, but with a coincidental audience, as I phrased it.
Well, yeah, I don't imbibe alcohol during the week, so I have some delicious coffee. So
excellent, man, excellent. All right, just while we wait for people to trickle in, we've already got a nice substantial viewing there. Hello, Tolly BT. Hello, Jane Doe, Cornelius, and Sunny Zar. Thank you very much for tuning in. Really appreciated that you are some of the early birds that have that are here, even though the time has been jumping around. So without further ado of getting into the topic itself, I first want to just lay some context. Quentin, can you tell the audience who you are, but then also where you are currently residing in terms of where are you currently locked up?
Okay, so yeah, I'm Quentin Ferreira. I grew up in Joburg, and I'm a clinical psychologist by profession, although now I'm working in IT. I live in The Hague in the Netherlands. So I've been locked up here going on 7 weeks now. And a couple of minutes ago, I just heard that our lockdown has been extended until the 20th of May with new flexible rules and stuff like that, which maybe we can talk about if you're interested. Yeah, so that's who I am. I still have a very deep interest and passion for South Africa. And of course, I've kept my interest in psychology going because I find people much more fascinating than the mysteries of the universe. And yeah, that's who I am and what I'm all about.
All right. So now in this time of lockdown, in this time of isolation and social distancing, can you give us some insight from a psychology perspective in terms of what is going on within the human mind during this time? During a time, for example, someone like me that's just in my apartment without any family around me, what is happening within the mind of a social animal like a human during a time of isolation?
Oh, that's an awesome question, and I've actually done quite a bit of reading into the research on social isolation in terms of how it impacts human beings. And so I guess if I could sum it up, one of the most important aspects which isolation affects is our cognitive processing. So in the research, you can look at how prisoners are affected by sort of solitary confinement, or you can look at prisoners of war, for instance. You can also look at people who might have been lost and had to wander through the bush, or might have been lost and had to, like, on a yacht or whatever, and had to sail for months without people. And so one of the things you find is your cognitive processing completely goes out the window. And the reason for this is that our cognitive processing relies on other people for environmental feedback. So a few things might change for people. One is perception of time. So for some people, time perception might speed up, it might slow down. So that's a key thing to keep an eye on in the lockdown situation, because our routines and rhythms rely on our perception of time. So obviously you can check your clock, but if you just sort of trust your bodily instincts to perceive time and stuff like that, you might end up in a bit of a tricky situation where you're going to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and not waking up until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, kind of thing, if you sort of let your own rhythms take flight. Another interesting thing, actually, is it has to do with reality testing. And I found this super fascinating. So we, as human beings, we like to think that we're very rational animals, but in fact, we're not. The very first way that we process anything that happens around us is emotionally. So it first goes through the filter of our emotions. We make an action, and then we make a rational justification for the action. And social relationships are very important for emotional processing, in that we process something, we react to it, and then we look to our social environment for cues as to whether our reaction is proportionate to the stimulus or not. So if we have like an emotional freak out over, I don't know, let's say we hear a noise coming into at the door or whatever, we hear a noise, we think, oh shit, someone might be breaking in. We would probably look around to the person nearest to us and go, hey, did you hear that? And if they go, oh yeah, I heard that, it was the cat. Oh, okay, yeah, cool, then you feel relaxed. But if you're on your own, that ability to share your perception with people is greatly impacted. And I think we're trying to replace it, if you're living alone, with online interaction, but that doesn't quite capture the vicissitudes of social, having someone physically present, basically. And another interesting thing, this was also pretty cool. So they noted that people that were in social isolation for a long time started to hallucinate. So they might have auditory or visual hallucinations. And cognitive psychologists speculate that the reason for this is that our minds are used to a lot of stimulation, and being a social animal, we're actually constantly bombarded with stimulation and salient stimuli in the form of words that have lots of meaning. And when our brain is not functioning on that level, it kind of makes up stimulus to keep it going. So people might hear things or see things out of the corner of their eyes if they're isolated for too long. So yeah, your reality testing is taking a little bit of a beating as an isolated person. If you want to talk a bit about neurochemical stuff, I can also talk a bit about that if you're interested.
Yeah, well, I think that's an excellent way to really start this off. Is let's get into the meat of this and thoroughly cover it in terms of what's going on inside your noggin during this time.
Cool. Okay, so one of the neurotransmitters that facilitates bonding is called oxytocin. And actually, oxytocin is released whenever we touch people and whenever we form close social bonds. And oxytocin is super, super important in mitigating the stress response. So the stress hormone is cortisol, and oxytocin kind of takes the edge of cortisol, to speak in layman's terms. So that lack of touch actually inhibits that which inhibits stress in our immune systems. So that is also another important thing that's happening neurochemically, is we're not getting that kick of oxytocin from bonding with people. And I don't know if policymakers actually considered these aspects when they put through their suggestions of how to manage the corona crisis. But yeah, that's another discussion.
Right. So now I think one of the most famous or well-known policies that has been being followed all across the world is social distancing. Now, I mean, humans are herd animals. We're not made to live alone, as you just described. What do you expect to see? How do you expect people to react to this fact that they can't now just embrace their loved ones or have a close personal, when you're talking to someone, be in the presence of someone? How do you think people are going to deal with it? What do you expect to see in society on just a generalizing level when it comes to social distancing?
Sure. I expect to see a lot of distress, actually, and that's quite a sad thing to say. Because as I said earlier, the neurochemical side of things is very, very important. So I do expect to see an increase in loneliness, and we know that loneliness is associated with increased depression. We also know that it actually feels like physical pain for some people. So that could be another unintended side effect of the social distancing. But on the other hand, I was speaking to someone, and he said to me, hey, don't you think this term social distancing is probably the incorrect way of framing it? We should maybe call it physical distancing. And I think that actually might have been a better way of framing what we're trying to do, because we're not trying to distance ourselves socially. We're trying to distance ourselves physically in order to mitigate the transmission of an infectious virus.
I mean, if your neighbor is standing across the street and you're just leaning over your gate and talking to him, that's not social distancing in the literal sense, but it's physical distancing.
Exactly. So I think reframing what we're trying to achieve in that way is maybe something to think about.
So here's something interesting to add to what you were just saying. So I'm still getting the hang of this projecting the screen, but let's just see here. All right. 1 second. Perfect. All right. So as you can see there, this headline I saw today, coincidentally. So prescriptions for anti-anxiety meds spike amid coronavirus. The new reports find, and this is in the US. Is this expected?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's definitely that. And so it's not just the physical aspect and the social aspect that I think we need to look at, because for a lot of people, our ways of coping with stress and frustration during normal times have also been restricted. So if I was, let's say, treating someone with anxiety and they were healthy, I might suggest that they go out for a walk every day for 30 minutes and get a little bit of exercise going, because exercise also releases, positive not positive or negative, but neurotransmitters that diminish the impact of cortisol. Okay, so I love it. I wake up every day at 5 a.m. I hit the gym at 5:30. By the time I'm out of the gym, I have an endorphin rush that makes me feel like I can crush any obstacle in front of me. Okay, and I think the fact that we are now not able to cope with stress in the way that we used to is leading to stuff like the increase in anxiety meds being prescribed in the US. So it wasn't just the social aspect, it's also the fact that, we don't cope as we normally would because we're stuck inside the house.
All right, so here's actually a question for you. I'm just going to stop the projection. Okay. So here's a question for you, Quentin. The real life boy asks, what do you think the psychological effect of rebelling against the lockdown is? What happens in the body when someone sneaks out to do something in defiance? That's a very good question.
Yeah, that is a very good question. You know what? I haven't actually read into the psychology of rebellion, but if I was to just speculate, I would think that it feels good because it's transgressive. And what makes it feel good is the reward response that you get from that. Can you guys still see me? Sorry, my screen has gone off.
No, we can see you, man.
Okay, cool. Yeah, my screen went off. Sorry. Yeah, so I think if you, let's put it this way, it depends on the consequences of your rebellion. If through rebellion you attain something that you weren't able to attain during the lockdown, be it social contact with someone, or for my friends and family back home, if you were able to get a few guais and a 6-pack of beer, that reward response will probably increase the frequency or likelihood of you rebelling against the lockdown. On the other hand, if someone snitches on you and you get into a lot of trouble, I would say that you will activate the behavioral inhibition system, and it probably would make you feel much more anxious about leaving the house in the future, which I also think is at play. And the suspicion of others around us.
I think what you're describing here is precisely the reason why so many teenagers smoke. It's that edge that you get to it. It's the fact that you're doing something that's not allowed. I think that's definitely an element that will come in as people start normalizing the lockdown and actually then start not adhering to it.
Yeah. It feels good because you're not supposed to do it. You know, that transgressive aspect is hugely important. Yeah.
So you've said you've been talking to a lot of people during this time. You've actually reached out just to have some conversations, some healthy conversations with people during this time, bounce some ideas. And I think that's a very admirable thing to do. I think it's definitely something I would encourage more people to do. You don't need a psychology background like Quentin here to actually just help someone in their life by giving them some attention in terms of talking to them about something that might be worrying them, something that might be on their heart at that time. But now from you that has actually put yourself out there to really talk to people, just to give them an ear to listen to what they have to say, are there any broad themes that you've picked up on, or things that you've realized that are definitely playing on people's emotions and on their psyches that weren't there pre-lockdown?
You know, one of the things that I think has come to the fore, and we should actually dig deep in this because I know you would like to. One of the things that I think has come to the fore is the element of control. And so control at this stage is, I think, the most significant psychological conflict for people. And if we think about this, right? So this virus is an invisible external enemy. And we've evolved something to help us deal with this kind of evolutionary threat, let's say, which is the disgust response. So we've talked about the disgust response in the context of politics and how, like for instance, Hitler's dehumanization of the Jews relied on this disgust response, in that the Germans were the pure people and they had to sort of separate the Jewish people that were not part of their society from them. But now we actually have a real threat to our disgust response, and our evolutionary fear of death is at the fore. So in a situation like this, people are very concerned with cleanliness and purity, not only in the physical sense, but also in the metaphorical sense. And this is why I think we're seeing people respond to the lockdown in almost such a fundamentalistic way. So people, for instance, if you go out for a run in South Africa, you're going to trend on Twitter because Nicholas Bauer is going to virtue signal and whatnot as you are this disgusting threat to our safety and our health and our sanity. And that is a very interesting theme that's coming up, because people are feeling out of control. The things that they used to be able to do have been taken away from them. They've realized that, first of all, they're not really free. It's the government that allows them to be free. And that conflict is playing out among many, many people in many different ways.
Well, that's definitely something that I would expect as well, just if I had to speculate myself. I think definitely something that I've also picked up is this anxiety connected to this sense of control, almost a sense of helplessness where no matter what I do, the lockdown is going to continue or be extended, no matter how well I behave myself. It's a very cruel version of like what you were subjected to when you were a child. When you were punished for something, if you behaved yourself, you wouldn't get punished again, you'd actually get rewarded. But in this instance, it's almost as if it doesn't matter how well you behave yourself or how well you keep to the rules. You might just be slapped with another extension to the lockdown. With doesn't matter what you do. So I think that's really eating at people. The fact that they just feel helpless. And I think you've probably picked up on that theme as well.
Definitely. And, an interesting psychological disorder, I'm sure everyone's heard of obsessive compulsive disorder. So OCD, as we call it for short. And so previously it was classified as an anxiety disorder. I think the DSM-5 has changed that a little bit, but I haven't read the DSM in about a year, so don't quote me on that. But anyway, the interesting aspect is that you would have an obsessive thought, an intrusive obsessive thought, and that engenders anxiety in you. And then you have a behavioral compulsion that you use to try to get rid of the thought. So for people with germ anxiety, they would wash their hands or block him on Twitter. People who, it could go magical. Like they could think that the world is going to end if they don't switch off every light bulb once or twice or three times. And I actually think our compulsion of our age in terms of the coronavirus is the compulsion is what we get when we check the figures. So we're compulsively checking the figures and reminding ourselves of, oh, look how many people today have got this thing. Oh, look at the curve, this compulsion. And then we kind of try to balance it out through, the obsession is on the virus. The compulsion is checking the figures and trying to balance it out by, reporting your neighbors and stuff like that. So I don't know if actually, sorry, I've lost my train of thought there for a second.
No, man, it's fine. So just here quickly in the chat, hello, JC. He says, hey, Roykat, thank you for tuning in. And also something a while back, but I see Andre, onrehabiliteerbare Afrikaner, is also in the chat. Welcome, Andre.
Hey, Andre.
Marlene is also in the chat. Hello. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Let's just see one thing before we continue this. Right, the stream is sitting at 19 likes. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. It helps out a lot. Let's see. I've been neglecting the chat a bit. Let's see what's going on. So Dagbreker says, and you might enjoy this one, Quentin. I've been observing stoicism a lot more. One particular thought comes to mind that helps with preparation for future tragedy. Me and Quentin have been in private actually discussing, as Roman calls it, stoicism, or what did he call it?
I think it was like stoicism or something.
Stoicism, yes. We've been discussing stoicism quite a bit offline, and I think this is a very nice type of outlook to have in this time. I mean, that's my outlook in terms of I'm taking things as they come. If I get sick, I get sick. That will be according to the bigger plan, according to the bigger script. Right. I couldn't do anything about it. I'm worrying about the things that I can control and the things that I can change, but the things that are out of my control, like for example how long the lockdown lasts, I'm not going to have sleepless nights about. I don't know about you, Quentin. Yeah,
exactly. And actually this completes the thought that I lost earlier, which was that the anticipatory of anxiety of something happening is probably worse than when the thing actually happens. And that's also something I've learned from stoicism and from treating people with anxiety disorders, you know. So indeed, it's about approaching the situation of these sort of things are in my control. I can practice social distancing physical distancing as much as possible. I can mitigate risks in the following ways. But if I get sick, I've done what I could do. Then I have to deal with it in a rational and logical way. But the anxiety that people have about not getting sick and not getting infected, and then they come up with all these weird things like, oh, I'm going to have to report my neighbors because otherwise I might get sick. That's probably not the right way to approach things.
That actually reminds me of something I wanted to ask. But first, let's address a question in the chat for you, Quentin. Might this lockdown anxiety lead to an increase in self-harm or even worse?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that it might. Yeah, I mean, not only anxiety, but as we spoke about earlier, loneliness feeds into depression in a very insidious way. So it could be,
But then the question that I thought of is, and this is something that I've been, I'm writing an opinion piece on it right now. What, according to you, is the psychology of snitching? Where is this coming from? Where is this very actually strange phenomenon in human behavior, but it seems unanimous across humanity? I mean, it's not unique to South Africa. We saw, as I once tweeted out, there was a news story from New Zealand where the police there set up a website so that regular citizens could report their neighbors if they broke lockdown rules. And so many New Zealanders were so eager to report their fellow citizens and their neighbors that the website itself crashed. So, I mean, we've seen it in South Africa, our own brand of snitching, or in PMPs as well, where we have journalists driving around with their smartphones taking pictures of people and saying, how dare this one individual be jogging. My favorite comment under that tweet was, he's just chasing his dreams. So, so where is this coming from? Why are so many of our compatriots in South Africa, but across the world, so inclined to snitch on the people around them and report them to the authorities?
Okay, so I think there's two things. Okay, the first is that it goes back to control, as we discussed earlier. Okay, and yeah, the funny thing is, even people who don't trust the government are looking to something larger than themselves for control at this point. And for most people, the biggest thing that they can think of is the government. Not for most people, but for a lot of people, the biggest thing they can think of is the government. They almost have this sort of paternalized relationship with Big Daddy State, and they want to be an agent of the state because they think the state will protect them. So there is that aspect of it, I think. What I also think could be going on, and we did touch on this too, is the in-group, out-group purity dynamic. So if you are part of a group who are the good people who stay at home, it's much easier for you to look at an outsider and want to kind of punish them or expel them because they are a threat to your peace and safety and disinfected lives. So I think those two aspects play a big role. But also don't underestimate, people's need for power. I think that could also come into the case. And if we're looking at lack of control, yeah, might be for some the only way that they feel like they can empower themselves is by snitching on other people. But snitches get stitches where I come from. So,
well, we just got that in the chat. Dean says
Dean Boschetti sounds familiar. He's actually he's my wife's cousin.
Oh,
shout out to Dean.
Nice. All right. Here's an interesting comment, actually. Snitches come from a distorted view of the value of authority. Well, I mean, I can't really... do you have any comments on that, Quentin?
Yeah, it's kind of what I said about, people develop this sort of pathological paternalized relationship with authority and with the state. And in times where they feel a little bit out of control, for some, that's, the big, this all goes back to actually death anxiety. And one of the most important aspects of Christianity is that we are saved from death through Christ and through God's sacrifice of his only son. So that sort of thematic element and that archetypal wish to be saved from death plays a big role in how people look at the state as well. There was this Russian, I think he was, Mikhail Bakunin. He's kind of a Russian leftist anarchist, and he wrote a book about God and the state and how a lot of people project godlike omnipotence and omniscience onto the state. So yeah, I agree with the real life boy in that sense.
So here's something else that that's got a lot of South Africans talking, and that is the ban on alcohol and cigarettes. Now, we can chat about that for hours, but I specifically want to talk about what does it do to someone that is addicted to alcohol or nicotine in a time, and you just tell them to quit cold turkey and you don't really have a choice in the matter?
So the scary thing about addiction is that someone who becomes addicted to a substance, for them, that is the most primal and the primary elements of their survival. So the substance that you're addicted to hijacks your reward system of your brain to the point that you forget about other stuff like food, cleanliness and whatever, and that becomes the target of your survival. So you're literally feeling like there's an existential threat to you if you can't get the substance that you're addicted to. And I did spend some time working at rehab in Johannesburg while I was training to be a psychologist. And man, it's really something to behold. When someone is in acute withdrawal, you can see that lizard brain coming out, and they will try literally any type of manipulation that they can to get through you and to that substance. So for people who are addicted to cigarettes or alcohol, in this time, I can only sympathize with them because it's extremely distressful. And yeah, all rational and probably, let's say, moral behavior might go out the window because people will do anything to get a fix if you're that addicted. I know cigarettes it's distressing. You're probably not going to go sell your car to buy a pack of smokes or something like that. But drug addicts that are addicted to alcohol have done stuff like that. They prostitute themselves, or even family members. I've seen stuff like that. So all bets are off. And for me, look, I don't quite understand why the government went to do that. I know from an externalities point of view, banning alcohol has had the effect of emptying the emergency departments of hospitals. But for me, they weren't approaching it from a risk mitigation perspective. They were approaching it from a rights mitigating perspective. And for me, it looks just like they were trying to mitigate people's rights for a while. The people are the ones that are going to suffer. But on the plus side, the government's not getting any sin tax either. So they might be shooting themselves in the foot as well. But I completely disagree with the ban on alcohol and cigarettes. And I don't know of another country that's done that, to be quite honest with you.
Well, here's another question for you, Quentin. Tamron Urendal asks, what is the psychological effect on someone who has been quarantined with an emotionally or mentally abusive person?
Yeah, Tamron. Wow, that's a good question, and I think that person is at risk for depression, at risk for anxiety, PTSD, that kind of stuff. So it's not easy being around someone for a few hours who's psychologically, emotionally, physically abusive, and being stuck inside a home with them is a terrible punishment for something you haven't done wrong. So there is no good way of looking at that. It can be really, really tough. And I hope that if there are people out there like that, they are looking for a way, or maybe another family member or friend that they can go and stay with, because I wouldn't want to be in the house with someone for a period of weeks.
But now let's say that person does not have that option. What advice would you give for such a person to really make the best of it, or to really minimize the effect on themselves?
I'm cautious to give advice about this kind of thing, because I would need to know a little bit more about the circumstances, right? I mean, if we were living in a functioning society, my advice would be to call the police and have that person arrested. That would be probably the easiest solution. But of course, many people are stuck in a cycle of dependency with someone who might be abusive. So let's say it's your father's abusive, and he's the breadwinner, and you need him to have a roof over your head. I guess what I would say is try to be a little bit perceptive about what can set him off and what doesn't. And just in the short term, just purely for survival reasons, try to avoid the kind of triggers that could trigger that person. And there is really nothing else I can say about that. I wish I could give you a wise answer that will solve the problem, but it's very complicated.
And then another thing that people are experiencing definite effects due to the lockdown is definitely that creep of depression, that feeling of like a weight on you, maybe a lethargic feeling, or a feeling of tiredness, or not feeling that as passionate or energized. Are there any ways that you can actually deal with that as someone, if you are feeling those types of symptoms due to the lockdown? Is there any like basic things you can do to mitigate that, to keep your mental energy up, keep yourself sharp, keep yourself nice and awake during this time?
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to talk a bit about how inactivity feeds into depression. And this is a well-researched area of psychology. But from an existential point of view, when a psychologist is faced with someone who comes to their office and is saying, look, I'm depressed, there are broadly two ways of thinking about it. The first way of thinking is, okay, let's explore this person's inner conflicts, let's explore their life, and see if we can raise their insight into what is going on. And through raising the insight and making the person aware of their behavior, they might find a new way of behaving that leads them away from depression. The other way of doing things is a little bit counterintuitive, but I quite like it, which is to say that a person doesn't have depression. A person does depression. So what do I mean by that? So there is a gap between a feeling and an action, right? So a lot of people that were depressed, they would come to me and say, you know what, like I woke up in the morning, I thought like I've got nothing going on for me. What's the point of getting out of bed? So I stayed in bed. So in between the feeling and the behavior, a thought happened. So raising a person's insight into that thought isn't going to change the situation. But what might change the situation is for the person to start taking some control and having a little bit of agency and saying, well, I felt like I didn't want to get out of bed, but I got out of bed. And once I got out of bed, I'd already conquered one thing. The next thing I could do is make my bed. And I like to operate on my pet theory of the cascade of wins. So if you're feeling a little bit down, you need to do something that you can win at. And it doesn't have to be something big. It is just something that you can manage and something that you can do, and that makes your immediate surroundings and your life a little bit easier. And so I would say if someone is feeling a bit down, think about which ways you can activate yourself. So you might want to just do 15 or 20 minutes of yoga. I mean, we have great people on YouTube with some awesome yoga videos, and that is very healthy. And it gives you something to do. And exercise actually builds up your immune system, and also is one of the things that helps people's mood increase. So there's that. Another thing that you should be very, very aware of, when I say inactivity, I don't just mean doing stuff. I mean curating things and not being a passive recipient of the information that's out there. So what I think is playing into a lot of people's depressive processes right now is that people are alone and they're substituting physical contact with online contact. But there's a price for that, which is with every nice interaction you might have with someone on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, you've got a whole bunch of morons posting probably negative things or dumb things and getting into fights. Then actually you're consuming that passively. So I think be a little bit more active about curating the types of experiences you're having online, the books you're reading, the media that you're exposing yourself to. I think that could go a long way as well. So a little bit of exercise, a little bit of curating your experience, and also reaching out to people, talk to someone. That should go without saying, but for a lot of people, they might feel like they don't want to burden someone. So if you don't want to burden your friends or family, look at SADAG, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. Give them a call. I know they're working right now. Or someone close to you who you can trust to open up to, but don't just sit there and wallow in it, because that is really a route to the pits of hell.
Right. And then just going to go check out of the chat for a moment while you were giving that very interesting and detailed description. We've had a few messages come in. Let me see here. All right, so Memes of Destruction is in the chat. Hello, Memes. He says, hail Marlene, RJJ, Jack, Brendan, Dag, Quentin, and Caracal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. How are you?
So then another question that I had was this whole thing, and I've experienced this personally, where when you're talking to someone over a screen or over the phone or over some type of technological device, your mind doesn't give you that same satisfaction as talking in the presence of someone, talking to someone face to face, literally. Do you have any idea why that is?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the whole reality testing aspect, and there's something about digital communication where we don't quite have those subtleties that might be lost in the room. I don't know if anyone has ever had a text from someone and they say K, and you don't really know how to interpret that. But if that person was in the room with you, you could read their body language a little bit better, or you might hear the prosody in their voice or their tone, and it sends a different message. So there's no replacement for in-person conversation, because you're not only communicating through what you say, you're communicating through how you say it, your body language, your facial gestures and stuff like that. So I think that is, to answer your question, what is really missing. It's that other level of communication, which is a bit more of speaking to the unconscious, I would say, than just speaking to the rational mind, which is what we do when we speak with words, basically.
Yeah, no, I think our brains are absolutely magnificent at realizing the fake, or realizing what's fake and what isn't. I mean, you can just look at special effects in film, how people can pick up the tiniest bit of movement that's just a bit off in terms of CGI, completely saying, "Oh, this is real. This doesn't look real. This looks fake." So I think there's definitely something there where we haven't perfected our communication technology quite yet to that point. A more mystic person would say, but you're not in the presence of the aura of the other person, therefore you don't get that same satisfaction. But I think definitely the big reason there is you can't, over a screen, you can't catch some of those tiny nuances that you would catch in person. Very tiny things that it's so subtle that you can't really even point to it. It's your unconscious mind picking up on it. Yeah. So I definitely think that plays a role.
You're perceiving it, and you don't know that you're perceiving certain things. So yeah, you're right. And the aura is a very nice metaphor. It's not like a literal thing, but metaphorically it is true.
Right. So another thing that I've seen a lot of people struggle with, and people finding very creative ways to traverse this problem, is where people are in romantic relationships, but unfortunately are being kept apart by the lockdown. What can you do in such a situation to make the most of it and to really mitigate or to minimize the potential damage that could come from this, or just lost time, if you will?
Yeah, that's a very tricky one. So I've been married for quite a while. I'm not going to say how long. 7 years. My wife said me. I knew it was 7 years. So I'm sick of her by now. No, I'm joking. But yeah, so I have the luxury and the love and the benefit of being at home with my significant other, and it's actually been pretty cool. But for those who are communicating digitally, this goes back to what we just said. Your communication needs to be even clearer than normal, because you miss out on those subtleties, those little vicissitudes that you would pick up when you're alone with that person. So I think what I would say to people like that is, even if it comes across as desperation, just ask for clarification if you're not sure. Because as we said previously, reality testing happens in a social context, right? If your significant other says something to you and you're alone and you've communicated via text or digitally, it's not adequate for proper reality testing. So ask for clarification. This could be an opportunity to actually learn how to communicate about your feelings and thoughts in a little bit better. But of course, there is no replacement for physical touch, and a lot of people find validation in being or someone being affectionate with them. They see that as validation and as sort of reassurance that they're still in love. So if you're feeling like you need some reassurance, it might be good to ask for it. You always have the risk of coming across as clingy or whatever, but for me, that ship has sailed. I'm out the dating game now, so I would hate to be someone dating in the age of Tinder, I'll tell you that much.
Well, we've got a comment here from the Freighter Watcher who says, hello, I think the digital communication problem is the eye contact. It puts a glass wall between people. Oh, well, I think I don't know how you're going to be able to traverse that, though.
Yeah, but I think that's very important as well. Eye contact signals a lot of things. It signals attention. It signals trust. So yeah, good point. It is one of those nonverbal forms of communicating.
And now, seeing as we're talking about isolation and the negative effects it has on people, what is your view on solitary confinement as a punishment for criminals? I don't know exactly when certain criminals get that punishment, but I'm pretty much aware of what it entails. What is your view on it from a psychological perspective?
Well, you know what? I've actually seen people that have been put in solitary confinement in forensic hospitals. So I did my internship at Stagfontein in Johannesburg on the West Rand. Still probably the best year of my life. I learned so much. But there is actually a law that states that a person cannot be in solitary. I think it was for more than 8 hours. Don't quote me on that, but they really limited the time that someone could be in that space as a form of punishment or as a form of restraint. So there is some acknowledgement that it's actually almost like torture for a person. So I guess this is a deeper philosophical question about whether you think prison is for punishment or if it's for rehabilitation. If your perspective is that prison is for punishment and someone is maybe like a serial rapist or a murderer or something like that, and you're there to punish them, then solitary confinement is almost like one of the worst forms of torture besides physical torture. It is deeply disturbing from a psychological perspective. If the goal is to rehabilitate someone, then it's not the right thing to do. So personally, I don't want to make a moral judgment on that, but I know that certain people can be rehabilitated, whereas for others it's probably not going to happen. So I will leave it up to the courts to decide that, but it is like a form of torture, and if you're doing that, just be aware of the implications.
So just a quick question as well that I'm going to ask you while I go fill up my glass of water again. Where does this this inherent fear in humanity come from for plagues? I mean, the idea of a plague is something that's almost like etched in the back of our mind, in our collective unconscious. Why is that? Where is this coming from? What do you think pretty much tattooed that at the back of our mind? I'm just going to go fetch my water and I'll be back in 1 minute.
Okay, well, yeah, to make a simple answer of that, it's evolutionary, basically. And we spoke about the disgust reflex and its role in the survival of the species. So being afraid of a plague, it has actually, I think, two elements. Of course, one is the death instinct, or the fear of death, the self-preservation instinct, rather, that we all have. But the other one that I think is quite mystical and mysterious is the fact that it's unseen. So before, our species had evolved culturally, socially, and we had writing, and we were able to construct religious myths and stuff like that. We engaged in something which is known as animism, which means to look into the outside world and anthropomorphize certain aspects of the natural world. So what do I mean? Like, say there's a god of the wind, and when the god of the wind is pissed off, the wind howls, or the god that brings rain. And disease might have been seen as this godlike figure that brought death and destruction, but in an unseen way. Almost like the angel of death in the story of Moses, where they had to paint their doors to ward off the angel of death. So I think that evolutionary fear of death and instinct for self-preservation plays into our fear of viruses for the simple reason that, hey, a virus can kill off a large portion of our population, and we would have noticed that as we sort of stumbled around as hunter-gatherers in our distant past.
Well, I missed the majority of that answer, so I'm not going to be fake and comment like, oh, very interesting, Quentin.
It was very interesting, though.
Okay. I'll check on the replay. So something else that I've been wondering about was, but I've been theorizing or speculating about it for a while now. I've been quite outspoken on it. It's the phenomena where people will start normalizing not only the disease, but will start just disregarding the lockdown, but not in a form of protest where they are willingly saying, I'm going outside to protest the lockdown, but rather, I haven't seen my mate in like a month. I'm just going to go have a quick drink. Nothing's going to happen. That type of mentality where they're unconsciously violating the lockdown, but it is an unconscious rebellion almost against it. Do you expect this to increase? Do you think there's a grain of truth in what I'm expecting to happen, where we're going to see more of this unconscious rebellion against the lockdown?
Absolutely. I mean, if I just think of it as a neurological level, we're wired to behave in certain ways, and this lockdown contravenes all of the things that are natural to us. So unconscious or consciously, I do expect people to bend the rules. And I mean, I'm living in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is an extremely high trust society. People are very obedient. People generally, tend to follow rules. They don't like to rock the boat. In fact, in here they say "doe normaal," and that's like kind of their social philosophy is "doe normaal." So you're riding your bike in the wrong bike lane, hey, "doe normaal," stuff like that. So even here, on the first sunny day of spring, people were like, lockdown or not, I'm going out for a walk on the beach. And we are allowed to go for walks and stuff like that. But here people have had a long, hard winter. And this is the first couple of weeks where things have become a bit sunny and a bit warm. So some people have really desired to return to normality. And in fact, that is only natural and only normal. And I think we will start seeing that more and more as this goes along. Like the compliance will go down, but especially in cases where people think the rules are arbitrary. And that's where I think the South African government has made a massive fuck up, because they have put a lot of arbitrary rules onto things. So this is actually a good test of South African society to see whether people are able to identify when something is for the utilitarian good, or whether it's just arbitrary and a power grab. And I hope that as I tweeted the other day, like when they came for your cooked chicken and you didn't speak up because you were a dumbass who can't recognize danger, I really hope that some people are going to look at some arbitrary rules and start to question authority and power. Probably not, but a man can hope and a man can dream.
Right. So here's actually some breaking news, it seems. Breaking news from News 24. And this was 8 minutes ago. Ramaphosa deploys almost entire South African National Defence Force of over 73,000 until end of June to prevent. So he hasn't done his speech yet, but that's the news that's come out now. He's doing his speech in 10 minutes, or we can believe that it's going to start in 10 minutes. But any comments on that breaking news, Quentin?
I'm sorry, everyone that's back home. I care so deeply about South Africa, and I care deeply about my friends and family from there. And I'm actually feeling a bit emotional at the fact that the government seems to have run out of ideas. They think every problem is a nail to them, and they just have a hammer, and that's just how they're going to approach this kind of thing. And you guys deserve better, really.
Well, we've got a lot of people here speaking up against it and really putting their thoughts out there. But here's a more a thought or a comment in the chat to cheer you up. Quentin is spot fucking on, says Jack Stein.
What are you referring to there, Jack?
I think he was referring to your previous answer, either on the plague, or I can't remember what my question after that was. But
well, thank you, kind sir.
All right. So then something else that really has been bothering me in terms of looking at what's happening outside and looking how the government is reacting. Do you really think that the South African, now speaking in reference to this news now, do you think the South African government can continue to garner or maintain the goodwill of society in terms of lockdown extensions, what we're probably going to see tonight? Do you think they are being naive in thinking that they're just going to have an infinite supply of public goodwill and support, or do you think they grasp the fact that it's pretty much the ATM's almost done now in terms of getting people to support this?
Yeah, I think the fact that they've resorted to increased force says it all, really. They don't expect people to comply based on goodwill for each other or because of trust for the government. Right. So they are, if you don't like the carrot, they're going to show you the stick. And that's how I perceive their action in this regard. I mean, honestly, this just speaks to the flagrant disregard the ANC have for the sanctity of human life, for the free will of the people, and actually just for the people of South Africa in general. And this just shows the actual contempt. I'm sickened by the contempt that they seem to have for ordinary citizens. It really pisses me off more than anything. So sorry, you're going to get me started on that, but yeah.
No,
I hate them, I really do.
We're going to have to see what happens in 10 minutes, ideally, if he starts in 10 minutes. But firstly, just a quick interlude. Thank you very much for everyone that tuned in, everyone that's listening. The chat's been, as always, top-notch, very funny, but also very insightful, some witty, but also some very nice, as we say in Afrikaans, pitcourse comments there. And we are sitting at 30 likes. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. So here's a question. Let's see. I saw a question up here that I wanted to refer to, but I think I've lost it now. Very sorry, man. So something else that I think that needs to be discussed here in terms of, we're waiting for Cyril's address now, but and we've talked about this, is this phenomenon of the second coming of Ramaphosa, if you will, where people are now kissing his feet and saying, after his first speech, when he announced the lockdown, they said, this is Cyril Ramaphosa's JFK moment. This is the best speech I've ever heard in my lifetime. Wow. Tears are streaming down my face. I want to clap at the screen. I'm not exaggerating. These are almost verbatim quotes that I saw.
I've seen them.
What's happening here? What's going on? Why are we seeing this sudden resurgence in Ramaphosa and new donors crawling out of the woodwork?
Well, when you said the second coming, the religious imagery is so apt, because indeed, I think it is that unconscious need for a savior in the face of what people perceive to be impending death. And unfortunately, it's been projected onto a useless individual. But it's natural. I mean, he is the figurehead of a state which sees itself as a godlike power anyway. So I do think it is that archetypal need for a savior to pull one, or a hero even, to pull one out of a deadly situation. Unfortunately, these are tainted heroes. They're not deserving of the moniker at all. And you know what? Sorry, just to say, if you're a journalist or an analyst or an opinion maker at this stage and you are still acting like an apologist for this, first of all, I think you must go to the university and get your money back, because you haven't been taught to think critically. But I feel like you're now not victims anymore, you're accomplices. And I hope everyone is keeping a list of all the people who are engaging in Ramaphoria and acting like apologists for this government. Because when this lockdown is over, you need to seriously question why you go to them for analysis. I think actually I'm preaching to the people who are smart enough to come to Conscious Caracal for some kind of analysis, sure. But if you guys want to make a video and put that out on Twitter and send a little fuck you to these people, now's your chance.
Yeah, man, it's we've talked about this in private as well. I think what we're seeing here is definitely that it's hubris, man. You can't admit that you were wrong. You desperately need this you need to be right. You desperately want Ramaphosa to be the savior. And I mean, using the phrase "second coming" was just completely grabbed out of the ether. I didn't put any thought into it, so that's just my unconscious mind picking up on little patterns.
Exactly
what's going on. So yeah, I mean, RJJ puts it best. He says Ramaphoria is pure Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah,
no, absolutely.
But things in Stockholm are a little better than, even though they did basically nothing.
That's interesting, man. I'm actually quite surprised by the Swedish with their laissez-faire approach. They're just saying just be careful, but go about business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Dutch have somewhat in the middle of an approach. If you're interested, I can tell you. To be honest, okay, here's the conundrum I'm faced with, because I like Nassim Taleb, and in conditions of uncertainty, decision making is extremely difficult. And when you don't know the real risks of something, it's usually better to err on the side of caution, because if you don't err on the side of caution, you risk being completely wiped out. And if you're completely wiped out, you can't play the game. This goes for coronavirus, but it also goes for the economy as well. So what I think the Dutch have done is really good. So they've looked at this and said, okay, there's ways of mitigating the risk. What we're going to do is we're going to close schools, we're going to close restaurants, we're going to close businesses like gyms and other businesses where people have to touch you, like hairdressers, nail salons, massage parlors, sex clubs, stuff like that, which are totally cool over here, by the way. Not that I know from personal experience, but sex clubs are everywhere and it's fine.
I saw that glance you gave your wife.
No, she knows, because actually we stay around the corner from a sauna. So a sauna in this neighborhood is kind of code for a sex club. So every time we walk past,
thought it was just a Roman sauna, dude.
Yeah, exactly. And we smell the chlorine, we think about the sauna. Oh, I wonder how it's going in the sauna today. But anyway, so those kind of businesses have been shut down. But bakeries, little takeaways are fine. Stores are all open. Like, you can go into most stores, buy stuff. If you can't go to the store because it's closed, you can order from their website. We have like a Take-A-Lot equivalent here, which is called bowl.com. And we can go and bowl. And I bought a yoga mat. I bought a whole bunch of stuff. I got a couple of books. So in some sense, they've kept the economy going. Public transport is still running, but they've got shields between the drivers and people now. They've in stores, they've just put plexiglass barriers between customers and the people that serve the store, I guess, to keep businesses going, but mitigate the risks. You can go out and walk your dog. You can ride your bicycle as long as you observe social distancing. You can go and sit in the park if you want to, as long as you observe social distancing. my wife's got some friends here, and we have a little park around the corner. They were at the park, and the police came to them and said, oh, guys, don't worry. We saw you from afar, and we thought you were closer together than what you were. But now that we're close, we can see we were wrong. So carry on with your day.
Huh.
And I think
you won't see that seen in South Africa, man.
Exactly. But I think, the old proverb, the fish rods from the head first. If we had that kind of political leadership in South Africa, I mean, our prime minister just addressed the nation at 7 o'clock, and he was like, okay, guys, last week we spoke about the decision-making process and what criteria we're basing our decisions on. This week, let me tell you where we are in terms of those criteria, and then I will tell you the decisions we've taken, and we can talk a bit more about the future. So he's brought everyone into his confidence. He's brought them into their decision-making process. He's told them the why. He's told them the what, the how. And psychological research shows that if you want to persuade people, give them a reason. And it has ensured compliance. People have been very good. And I think the big mistake among many of the South African government is that their decision-making process has been completely opaque. No one knows why they decided to ban alcohol or cooked food, for that matter. I mean, I can't think of a good reason to ban cooked food. But then you have usually, and I hate to bring race into it, but I've seen it mostly being white liberal Cape Townians going, yeah, and Eusebius, of course, but he's an idiot, and going, oh yeah, well, you care more about Willie's chicken than you care about saving lives. Come on, everyone who is involved in the making of that chicken is going to suffer because of this completely arbitrary decision. So yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that's a very nice piece of information to end it on. You've actually provided a lot of insight into what's happening in the Netherlands and to be able to contrast it to South Africa. So seeing as Cyril's going to start talking in just a matter of minutes, he should have started talking, but I don't think he has yet because the view count's still the same. Quentin, what are your final thoughts today, just after what we've discussed? What's your final thought you want to send out there to the audience?
Yeah, guys, look, my final thought for everyone is, firstly, thanks for listening and for watching, and please support Conscious Caracal, share this video. But I spoke about this with Ramon, and the lockdown has given a lot of people a chance to evaluate and reevaluate their lives and the future of what things are going to be like. And if you're, let me put it this way, you have to approach this from an obstacle is the way kind of mentality. Okay, so this is an extremely unprecedented challenge for everyone, and it's very, very difficult. But there are opportunities in this situation to come out as a better person, a little bit wiser, maybe a bit of a better communicator. Maybe you can reconnect with some people who you might have lost contact with for some dumb reason. You know, it gives you time to reflect on yourself. It gives you time to think. But if you're suffering, please don't suffer in silence. Find a friend, find a family member, and reach out. And yeah, that's what I have to say. And all love and respect to my friends and family and everyone back home.
Well, thank you very much, Quentin, for coming on. This has been an excellent chat as always. I mean, you're the guest with the most appearances so far on Stream of Consciousness. Hey. 3. Yeah, and also just thank you everyone in the chat for tuning in. Let's see some of the last messages. Let's see. Cornelius says, thank you very much, gents. It was a really good chat.
Thank you, Cornelius.
Sideline Opinion says, thank you guys for your contribution to our well-being. No problem. The Freighter Watcher says, thanks, CC. Good guest. Very insightful. Oh, well, I'm glad I could have brought his insight to you. He has a medium. So yeah, my final thoughts would just be, and this is the opinion piece that I'm currently working on. It will be out in probably in a week. Take note. I mean, we've touched on this topic earlier in the stream. Take note of what's happening around you. Crisis always brings people's true characters to the fore, and I think people need to take some very hard looks at the people around them, whether that be people close to them or people in power or people just in the public eye. How people react now is going to tell you a lot more about them than how they react when they're calm and not under pressure. So keep that little book, write it down, and then also, but more importantly than that, make sure the best of you comes to the fore in this time. Make sure that when you are put under pressure, you can say, but the best of me came to the fore. Because I mean, we're living in historical times, and if you are unfortunate enough or fortunate enough to be written into the history books, I think it would be, why risk that your worst side is immortalized forever? So I think that's a good way to end it. And yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Quentin, for joining me, and I'll definitely
Thank
have
you
you
for
on
having me,
again.
Roycott. For sure,
All right.
anytime.
Everybody, stay safe and have a good one. Enjoy the rest of the lockdown.